The sermon letter of Hebrews is written to a group of Messianic Jews who are tempted to turn away from Jesus and return to Judaism. And the preacher is going to respond to this group by saying, no, Jesus is so much better. And I can't imagine a more profound introduction to that message than what we have here in Hebrews 1:1-4. The letter begins by saying, long ago, at many times and in many ways, God spoke to our fathers by the prophets. But in these last days, he has spoken to us by his Son. And then the preacher just unleashes this sevenfold description of the Son. Let's take a look at that sevenfold description. The Son is appointed heir of all things. He is king. He's also creator. He's the radiance of the glory of God, the exact imprint of his nature. He is God himself. He upholds the universe by the word of his power. He made purification for sins. And then, number 7, he sat down, the majesty on high. This is the Jesus that you're tempted to walk away from. How could you do that? And then in verse 4, there's this curious comparison between Jesus and angels. Why? Why this comparison? Who cares about angels? And why also have we titled this section, Jesus is better to all prior revelation instead of better than angels? Well, the Jews believed that the old covenant, the Mosaic covenant, was delivered to Moses on Mount Sinai by angels. Let me show you where we get that idea from, kind of a curious place. The sermon of Stephen, the sermon that he delivers in Acts 7 before he's martyred. He says that you, Jews, received the law as delivered by angels. Angels delivered the law. Now, why does he make that point here in Hebrews? Well, his real interest is not in angels. His interest is in the covenant, the message delivered by angels. And if he can prove that Jesus is better than angels, well, then he's proven that the message of Jesus is greater than the message of the angels. But let's return to this comparison here between the Son and angels, 1:5-14. It says in verse 4 that Jesus became as much superior to angels as the name he inherited is better than theirs. So what's the name given to angels? Well, the name of the angels is servant. They're called ministering spirits. He made his ministers flames of fire, he says here in this section. But the name of Jesus is Son. And this title Son, it implies king, it implies ruler, and the angels are going to worship him as ruler. The first quotation, there's just a mountain of quotations here in these verses. The first quotation is from a messianic psalm, Psalm 2, and it says that you are my son. Today I have begotten you. And then the second one is from the Davidic covenant in 2 Samuel 7, where it says, I will be to him a father, and he will be to me a son. We're talking about a king when we label Jesus the Son of God. But I want to take a closer look at that messianic psalm that I mentioned in Psalm 2. Let's look at that. First, we're going to jump back to Hebrews, though. Hebrews 1. So, very first quotation. Jesus is better than angels, because to which of the angels did God say, you are my son? Today I have begotten you. Where did that quote come from? It comes from Psalm 2, verse 7. The Lord said to me, you are my son, today I have begotten you. And this title, son, means anointed one, Messiah, king sitting on his throne in Zion. And to the Son, what does the Ancient of Days say? He says, I will make the nations your heritage, the ends of the earth your possession. You will rule over the world. And the preacher is going to pick up on this, the fact that the Son is king over the world. He's going to pick up on it in his exposition of Psalm 8, which is the critical Old Testament text in this first section. And he's going to say that it was not to angels that the Father subjected the world to come. No. The Father subjected the world. He gave the world to the Son to rule, not to angels. But then he admits something. He admits that in light of their present circumstances, their suffering, That's not what things look like right now. It doesn't look like the world has been subjected to the Son. He says that at present, we do not yet see the world subjected to him because the world's a mess. There's persecution. The citizens of the king are being persecuted. That's not the way it should be. So we do not see the world subjected to him right now, but what we do see, the preacher continues, is him made for a little while lower than the angels. Why would the Son be lower than the angels? And he answers that question, that the Son may taste death for everyone. That's the reason for his incarnation. And that is the great salvation as well. The Son tasting death for everyone. And that's going to introduce us to our first warning passage here in Hebrews 2, 1 to 4. And the warning is, how shall we escape if we neglect so great a salvation? And now he's going to, in this section, he's going to land the plane for why he made this comparison to the angels. He says that if the message declared by angels was reliable and every transgression or disobedience received its just retribution, that is the curses of the Mosaic covenant, the covenant delivered by angels, if they came to pass, well then certainly we will not escape judgment if we neglect the salvation declared by Jesus. We can only be saved through God's Son, the radiance of his own image. And you see, that's how the book of Hebrews works. Do you kind of understand it now? Jesus is greater than the old covenant practiced by Judaism. Therefore, man, if you remain loyal to him, you have everything to gain. But if you turn your back on him, you have everything to lose. Now let's take a look at the next section, 3:1 to 4:13. Now, unlike chapters 1 and 2, where a measly 4 little verses are given over to the warning, in this section, almost the entire thing is warning. But he is going to set up this warning by taking his audience back to the time of the wilderness wandering. You remember that 40 years walking around in the desert following Moses? Well, Moses, the preacher says, was faithful in God's house as a servant. And he's going to bring back that dichotomy between a servant and a son. Moses was faithful in God's house as a servant, but Jesus is faithful over God's house as a son. Jesus is a king over the people of God. Therefore, if Jesus is greater than Moses, so is his covenant. Therefore, do not turn back to Judaism, the old covenant. And he's going to warn you. He's going to say, this is what will happen if you do turn back. You remember what happened to that Exodus generation, the first generation of wilderness wanderers? Well, the same thing that happened to them will happen to you. And he makes that point by preaching this time from Psalm 95. And he's going to highlight 3 elements from this psalm. That wilderness generation heard, they were hardened, and they did not enter. Let me show you that. We're going to jump back to Hebrews chapter 3. Hebrews 3. So here's our main text, Psalm 95. Today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts, for if you do, you will not enter his rest. So he's going to take that test, and he's going to apply that test to the wilderness generation. Did they hear? Yes, they did. They were at Mount Sinai, heard the voice of God. Were their hearts hardened? Unfortunately, they did not believe God's promise, therefore they did not enter his rest. Let's look at this progression in the text once more. So here let's go down to 3:17. Their bodies fell in the wilderness. That generation died without entering the land. They were unable to enter because although they did hear, they heard the message of God, that message did not benefit them. Why? Because they were not united by faith. You see, they were unable to enter because they did not believe. That's the example of the wilderness wandering generation. And now the preacher is going to turn the attention to his congregation. He's going to say, all right, what about you? You heard the message of the gospel. Now what? How are you going to respond? Now, there remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God. The people of Israel never experienced God's rest after Joshua conquered the land. There remains a Sabbath rest, and now he's going to say, strive to enter that rest. Let's look at that. Such a critical verse. Verse 11 of chapter 4. Let us therefore strive to enter that rest. But be careful. Be careful. Take care, brothers, lest there be in any of you an evil, unbelieving heart. Unbelieving, just like the unbelief of the wilderness generation who were not united to the message of good news by faith. Therefore, do not be hardened by the deceitfulness of sin. And there you go. I mean, we're just getting started in the book of Hebrews. This is a big book, but I think you can see the pattern of how the preacher is communicating his message to this group of Messianic Jews. Well, the theological heart of the letter is next. Jesus as our new high priest in 5 through 7, and a new priest of the new covenant in 8 through 10. We're going to get to that next. Stay tuned.